right, hello and welcome back to Healing Corporate Trauma. This is a video series with me, Laura, and Patricia on the line here. We talk to people about how individuals can protect themselves, empower themselves, and heal from corporate trauma, and on how corporations can stop traumatizing their people too. We're here today with Jeni Crane. Jeni's a nutritional therapist and also a phlebotomist and a well-being coach, with a wonderful and successful online clinic supporting hundreds of clients to better health, including me. She has a real passion to help people find wellness and get back to feeling themselves. And I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Jeni, welcome. I'll hand over to Patricia in just a minute, but maybe if you want to start with, why do you do what you do? What brought you here?
Yeah, perfect. So I retrained to be a nutritional therapist back in 2015. And really that was as a result of my own journey to better health. So back in 2004, I got a diagnosis of PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And that diagnosis had kind of been a long time coming. It was as a result of being on hormonal contraception for a number of years, deciding that I didn't want to have that in my body anymore and wanted to just get back to knowing what my normal cycles felt like, knowing what it felt like to be without any external interference. And to my surprise, at 20, my periods didn't come back. And I was back and forth to the GP a number of times. Obviously, I was really disturbed by that. I was told when I first went on to, at the time I was on the injection, when I went on to the Depo-Provera injection, that they would take up to about 6 months to return. And so when 12 months had elapsed and then 18 months had elapsed, it kind of started to ring alarm bells for me. But I was being constantly reassured by the GPs. Just wait and see, it'll come back, you're in a prime young age, don't worry about it. And when it got to 2 years, it just got beyond ridiculous. And I eventually got a referral to the consultant gynecologist at my local hospital, who did some investigations and said, well, actually, the reason why you haven't had your cycles come back is because we can see that through the imaging that we've done, the blood tests that we've done, we actually are giving you a diagnosis of PCOS. Back in 2004, information on the internet and things like that was not really where we are now. So it was very much forums, very much just kind of almost like MS-DOS kind of information going on there. I just remember receiving my diagnosis, being told I'd need to be on medication for the rest of my life, and pretty much being sent out the room after about 15 minutes. And my first question was, is there anything that I can do to help myself? Is there anything that I need to change in my life? Is there anything that I need to, respect in my life in order to better my situation? And I was told very much no, it's a non-curable condition. At that time they said, between 5 and 10% of females were being diagnosed with this condition and just needed to take the medication and get on with it. As you may be aware, if you've sort of been reading in the latest kind of reproductive press, they reckon up to about 30% of women have some symptoms of PCOS, some kind of diagnosis of PCOS, whether they're symptomatic on scans or whether they have the hormonal presentation of PCOS these days. And there's a number of reasons that are kind of cited for that, one of them being exposures to BPA plastics by females when they're carrying the child in the womb, but also insulin dysregulation, which we see more and more of these days with people who are type 2 diabetic. And the two conditions have a lot of crossovers, which is why they predominantly use a diabetes medication, or a medication that's licensed for diabetes, for women with PCOS to try and bring their cycles back. So I'm not the sort of person who can be sent off just to be told, there's nothing you can do and get on with it. So I went off and did my own research. And like I said, the internet was really not where it is today. Was trawling through pages and pages. There was, I think, one support charity that was given to me, one name. And I couldn't really find an awful lot of information that was kind of correlating. A lot of it was conflicting. And because there were so many different presentations of PCOS, really didn't know what was right for me. So I started using myself as a bit of a human guinea pig. and started to kind of change various aspects of my life, including the way that I was running my life in terms of stress management and in terms of sleep. I was just out the back of my university course, so obviously my lifestyle was very much that of a uni student, terrible sleep processes, lots of drinking, lots of junk food, and I really just had to go through a bit of an overhaul of that. And it was really a case of, you know, doing things in a very stepwise way and finding the right way for me, which actually ended up taking about 8 years, all told.
Wow.
Brought all my symptoms into remission, was able to come off of my medication. And then I thought, well, why aren't other people told about this? Why aren't people told that, you know, there is another way and there are ways in which you can at least better your situation, if not, you know, put your symptoms into remission, if not come off of your medication, at least make things a little bit more bearable and manageable. And I never had a clue that nutritional therapist was actually even a job. You know, when we look back, you know, 8 years ago, and even really, I suppose, 7 years ago, when I first started training, I didn't actually realize that there were people who were guiding people one-on-one to better health. But I really thought, well, if this was the case for me and my diagnosis, how many other people are going and getting diagnoses every day of conditions, told that they need to be on certain medications, told that there's nothing that they can do with their diet and lifestyle, and just sent off kind of really disempowered. So it wasn't really even my search that brought up nutritional therapy as a job title. I was reading into it so much about nutrition and about, you know, movement and strength training and all of the benefits of those. But actually I got given a flyer for the College of Naturopathic Medicine, and they were having an open day, and they run a nutritional therapy course, and it said, would you like to retrain as a nutritional therapist? And I thought, well, I don't know, because I don't know what one of those does. Went along to the open day, and by the end of the open day, I was signed up to the course, and 3 months later, I was sat there in the classroom going, oh my goodness, what have I done? I haven't been in a classroom for probably about 12 years at this point. But I never looked back. I never once thought, this is too much, this is too crazy, this is too intense, I don't want to do this. I just had in my mind this really strong vision of the kind of injustice really that people are faced with when they are disempowered with a diagnosis, when they hear that information of, you have this, you've got to take this, and no, there's nothing else you can do. Because for everybody's health, there's always something that we can be doing better or different that's going to benefit us. But when somebody tells us that we can't, that word is a really strong word. You can't do anything to better your health. And I wanted to learn how I could, and learn how I could give people that hope, and how I could restore people's faith in their own bodies. Because the principle of nutritional therapy really is that your body's always trying to come back into balance. It's just about the blockers which are stopping it from returning back to that balance.
I mean, that's, yeah, a fascinating lead into sort of developing your health personally. And of course, now you help other people. When you were talking, I was thinking, how does it almost seems like when you're giving that diagnosis, it's an element of feeling helpless around. And how does that affect your personal resilience to be able to act in the world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely understand you there. And yeah, very much so. I remember leaving that appointment and just being in floods of tears to my mum on the phone, because I just felt completely powerless. I felt like the rug had been taken out from underneath my feet. And I very much felt like I was going there to get some answers and to walk away with almost like a plan. And I felt like I left with absolutely none of that. I had so many questions, and I just had this 15-minute appointment for the diagnosis, and there wasn't any follow-up. There wasn't any, okay, these are the things that you need to do, apart from, you know, take the medication and then carry on with it and just check in with your GP. You know, it was almost like a lifelong prescription I was given. And I think when I see people when they're very fresh into a diagnosis, you know, in nutritional therapy, we don't necessarily work with diagnoses in that we never claim to treat, cure, diagnose any people. That's not our remit. You know, that's very much left to our NHS and the medical professionals. But what we do give to people is we give them that hope, because when people come to me with a diagnosis, they've got a laundry list of symptoms that are going on for them, and they've been given this kind of branding, this label. Well, actually, we're so much more than a label, because everybody experiences a diagnosis differently, and everybody has different symptoms. And actually, my job very much is to reassure that person, to meet them where they are, but to help to give them back that hope, and to show them that actually it doesn't need to be really complex. It doesn't need to be really sophisticated right at the beginning. It's the basics that we need to put in place. And like you say, it's very much about that mental side of things. It's very much about developing that resilience, because unless you have that resilience, you know, all of the studies say, there's so much in the bodies of evidence to say that when people are coming at their condition, their diagnosis, whatever it might be, with a positive mindset, that those people tend to put their symptoms into remission. Those people tend to, you know, outlive their prognosis if they have a cancer diagnosis. You know, those people tend to really astound the medical professionals. And it's all about helping that person to maintain that positivity and maintain that little glimmer of hope. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken to people who've been round and round and round through the medical system, and they've been told either you're normal, your blood tests are all normal, but they know that they don't feel right. They know their own bodies. They know that they've just been steadily getting worse, or something's missing, or they're told you've got this condition and then that's that. And then they come to me and they say, do you know what? You've actually given me back hope. You've given me back the confidence in my own body that my body can do what it needs to do. And for me, that's like the most rewarding thing. That's the most rewarding part of my job. And that's very much why I did the coaching qualification as well, because it's about reframing things for people as well. And reframing is a big part of NLP. And that was a big part of this qualification that I did. And, you know, helping people to understand where they are at the moment, but also helping them to really visualize where they can be, and then putting those steps in between the two.
Lovely. Really do like shape your world, don't they? Like your mindset and the way that you speak to yourself and the stories that you create in your head, you know, you find that whatever you're telling yourself turns out to be true. And I think one of the things that I work with in a resilience practice is, how do you train yourself up when the going's good, so that you've got the tools when challenges happen. It's not about, resilience isn't about, oh, you know, shit's happened, how am I going to deal with it? It's about growing your sort of toolkit and filling up your cup so that you have resources to pull from, right?
Definitely. And systems and processes as well. So I very much talk about that. And I refer back to the amazing book Atomic Habits by James Clear all the time, because I just, you know, I could read that book every year for the rest of my life, definitely. And, you know, he talks about having systems and processes in place, and how we do in business, we naturally have standard operating procedures, and we have things that, you know, if we get a new starter, we give them a systems and processes manual, but we kind of don't think that we need that in our lives. Whereas if we have the systems and processes, like you say, when the going's good, when we're having a good day, if we've got a diagnosis and it makes us feel rough for most of the time, when we have those good days, if we can get those systems and processes in place, and they don't need to be super complex, they can be, you know, really very basic, but very much building on each other. Then when we do have those bad days, we can go, right, I can go back to autopilot, because I know that these three things, whatever it might be, make me feel good and help me to, you know, become more resilient and help me to cope with those bad days. And then those bad days aren't so bad, because then we're in that dopamine pathway of, I've done those things, I can feel good about that. I can feel good about myself because I'm doing everything that I can to better my situation.
I mean, when you've been talking, I've just been thinking there's a huge amount of stresses that we encounter, you know, just from work or from the busyness of current life. Do a lot of people come to you with all sorts of reasons or all sorts of stresses, or do they come with a specific diagnosis?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So I would say it's probably about 60-40. So 60% of people come to me with no diagnosis. They've just got a cluster of symptoms, or they've got a particular goal that they're trying to get to. So it might be that they're suffering with migraines. It might be that they have IBS. It might be that they're looking to work on fertility. It might be that they've had a diagnosis in the past, and that's kind of given them the impetus to really look at their lives and change their lives for the better. And then there's that 40% have a diagnosis, and that's kind of triggered them to go, right, okay, I want to take this into my own hands. And stress is probably one of the biggest aspects of what I look at with somebody when I'm working with them right from the get-go, because people think nutritional therapy, they think, okay, well, that's food. That's really straightforward. It's just food. But nutritional therapy is, you know, I don't really like using the word holistic because I think it's misused and misrepresented these days, but it is looking at the whole person and at all of the aspects that affect that person, from the drains on their resources, so the drains on their nutrient status, the drains on their energy, and the repletions that they have, so the opportunities that they have through the day to replete those nutrients, the demands that they have on their life, so whether that's that they're an insomniac, so therefore we know that they're not getting enough sleep, so therefore they're going to have certain nutrients that are low for them. Or they might have just had, you know, 3 children within a 5-year period, and that will be a big drain for them, and also a big stress. You know, whether that's a positive or a negative stress in their perception, it's still a stress. And as well, you know, relationships, work, all of those aspects. And I think, you know, from the perspective of the majority of my clients, you know, save a few who may be in relationships that they're not happy with, or they might have challenging children, work is categorically the biggest stress in most of those people's lives. And, you know, as you guys talk about, it's about resilience. It's not about removing that stress. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's actually about helping them to leave that job through the wellbeing coaching. You know, if that's their desire, it's about helping them to move into somewhere where they're going to feel more rewarded, less put upon. But most of the time it's about building that resilience with them and helping them to find ways in which they can buffer themselves against those stresses. And part and parcel of that is our nutrient status. You know, if we're running through our nutrients like crazy, like B vitamins and magnesium and those kind of things, which we do when we're stressed, as soon as those drop to a low level, we've immediately got less resilience anyway. Our response is going to be more pronounced. It's going to be more immediate. It might be that we have a shorter temper. It might be that emotions come to the surface very, very quickly when we're low in those nutrients. So actually, you know, getting somebody's nutrient status to where it is, where it needs to be, gives them that buffer and that resilience while they're working on all the other lifestyle factors as well, and while they might be, you know, putting in place boundaries and that kind of thing.
I love this. Like, I was a chemical engineer in a previous life, right? So I love me an energy balance, and it's just, you know, we all spend energy, be it mental, physical, emotional, maybe sort of like spiritual and energetic, or we're given energy out all day, every day, and that needs to come from somewhere. And sometimes it comes from, you know, mindset and mental tools. Sometimes it comes from, you know, relationships and emotions, but also food is literally fuel and we need fuel and nutrients to be able to expend our energy in the way that we want, in the way that we want to live our life. So I love it. I'm geeking out.
It's amazing what we expect our bodies to do.
Because, you know, with nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we're in this kind of, you know, for a lot of females and also a lot of males as well, in this dieting culture where we're trying to restrict calories. And, you know, it's my absolute bugbear because it's really oversimplifying food to just one property of that food. But we're restricting calories, and then we're also expecting our bodies to work on optimal performance and be able to do an optimal day's work, be really resilient, get to the gym, deal with the children and sleep well. And actually we've absolutely undernourished ourselves all day. And you wouldn't expect your car to do that. I mean, you'd very much expect, you know, that little orange light comes on, you can't then be driving up to London and back. It's just not going to happen. But we expect our bodies to do exactly that, you know, to, like you say, head out the door on half a piece of toast and a coffee, and to have a really good day at work and have really good output, and then to have a really balanced mood with our children when we're trying to get them all fed in the evening or whatever. So it's about very much helping people to understand that it is exactly that. It's an energy equation. You can't create energy from nothing. I think that's the fourth rule of thermodynamics. You cannot create energy from nothing. It's not, yeah, exactly. Nor destroyed. And you know, therefore we need to look at not just food as being calories, but food as being information for our bodies, and food as being information on how safe our environment is, you know, how much abundance there is in our environment. Are we putting our bodies into a stress situation by, you know, dieting is a stressor. You know, if we're putting our bodies into that stress situation, just fueling ourselves all day with caffeine and just getting the adrenal glands to just constantly pump out loads of adrenaline, then this is when we see people who are on this lifelong dieting cycle. They can't lose weight, but they aren't eating enough either.
Yeah.
But they're constantly in this fuel of, you know, adrenaline, spiking our insulin, and just putting on weight rapidly around the middle. And this is what I saw in corporate, is I saw a whole load of people who weren't eating breakfast, coffee for lunch, and they're struggling with their weight. It's so easy done. It's the culture, isn't it?
Yeah, what's resonating for me is like my last job was like construction site, long hours. I had like sort of frozen smoothie situations I could do in the morning, so I was getting something in my body, but on the way home it was, you know, whatever place was open for takeout.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky with timing, like when I left that, and like a bunch of other things happened that contributed to my my corporate trauma. COVID hit, and I had the flexibility, and a beautiful friend called Adrian Keys, and she's like, her background is nursing, and she's just a helper and a healer in all ways. We were like cooking our own food, like our own nutritious food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was just, it was instrumental in my healing. And I don't think I would have recovered quite so quickly if it wasn't for like the nutrients I was putting into my body.
Definitely.
I'd love though to dig in a little bit more to like what you would do if someone is, what do you see when someone is like stressed out, traumatized, depleted, and then, you know, what's happening in that person's body, and how could an individual sort of start to turn the dial on that? Like, what can we give people to kind of go away with here?
Definitely. So I think from what I see in people, it's very individual by their character. So some people I can tell straight away if that person's a stress character, because actually when we're doing the consultation over Zoom, they're all over the place. They're getting something out of their bag, they're ruffling through their papers, they can't stop moving around because they actually can't switch from being that really high energy, high adrenaline to switching to, okay, now we're doing some focused work for a couple of hours and it's just about you and it's just about talking. Other people tend to go the other way. So they will be very much quite closed down. They almost disassociate during the session. So they find it very difficult to talk about themselves, find it very difficult sometimes to focus. A lot of their questions will be, sorry, what did you just say? What was the question again? Because actually that's the only moment in their day that they've had to actually sit and, you know, have a bit of quiet time. It's quite alien to them. So it's very different by individual. And I can very much see myself in that first person. You know, I was very much the couldn't sit down, couldn't rest kind of person. And I was having nutritional therapy consultations at one point in my corporate journey. And I feel sorry for the practitioner, actually, because I was probably very scatty and remembering things in all different orders. And we very much work in a kind of timeline order in nutritional therapy to work out kind of triggers for things. I'm sure I gave her a bit of a hard time on that. But in terms of what's going on in that person's body, it also depends on where they are in the process. So we're very, very intelligent, our bodies, innate intelligence to be able to deal with acute stress. It's an amazing book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's fantastic because it very much talks about how a zebra can be running along the plain away from a lion one moment, next minute it's head down grazing on the grass. And, you know, we're not geared up like that these days because we've got constant stresses going on in our lives, constant adrenal activation, from COVID to the news to Brexit to children shouting to finances to, you know, the commute. Thankfully, a lot of people have managed to give up their commutes or at least shorten their commutes, to poor sleep, to bosses screaming down the phone at you, to deadlines, whatever it might be. And it's a constant onslaught of this adrenal activation. And so when somebody's in that acute activation phase, they're very good at actually having the stress levels go up, come back down, and they won't be as affected. Those don't tend to be the people that I see. The people that I see are generally much further over here on the kind of, on the upswing, in that they've generally been putting up with this for some time. You know, most of us have, if we've had any length of time within, you know, the big wide world, even, you know, students these days, you know, I wouldn't do anything to be a student right now because the amount of pressures that are going on for them. And, you know, even people in their very early in their career are experiencing the same situation. And that is that we start to lose this resilience to stress, physical resilience. So in the very extreme situation, these will be the people who can't get out of bed in the morning. They actually can't even elevate their cortisol enough to get themselves out of bed, get dressed and get to work. And that's the people who you see, they might be experiencing the same symptoms as chronic fatigue. So very much a flatline picture. I don't personally tend to go with adrenal testing because I can normally see if somebody's really adrenally depleted, and we don't use the word adrenal fatigue anymore. It's not really relevant in our world anymore, but adrenally kind of depleted, then that person will really struggle to be doing anything outside their working life. They're barely getting through the day. They're walking through treacle. But a lot of us are in that pre-period where we are still getting out of bed, might feel tired all the time, not rested on waking, very easy to wake up overnight. So very easy to pull out of your sleep and waking for no reason, feeling kind of startled, waking at the smallest sound or maybe no sounds at all. That person might be waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they might be under the illusion, you know, with the whole what's the name of the chap, Tim Ferriss and all of those individuals who were doing the very much early morning waking.
5 a.m. club, yeah.
5 a.m. club, exactly. And you know, getting a load done at that time in the morning, which is fine if you are also balancing the rest of your life load. You know, you'll probably find that the majority of those people don't have children, or they work for themselves, or, you know, they're able to then structure their day so that that's appropriate for them. They probably aren't then doing the school run 3 hours later. They probably aren't, you know, doing everybody's meals 12 hours later. So, you know, that very early morning waking is a first sign for me on the adrenal side of things. What we know is that we've got this HPA axis. So we very much look at biochemical pathways in nutritional therapy. It's very much looking at how can we influence the chemistry of what's going on inside someone's body? And first, before we influence it, we've got to understand it. So the hypothalamus is very much, it's in our brain, it's one of the glands, and it's there to protect us. It's basically like our vigilance gland, and it responds to external conditions, and it helps to keep you safe. So that's the one that sends all the hormones to the pituitary when you're under stress. The pituitary is then basically our master controller, really, for everything else that goes on hormonally. So when we think of hormones, we generally think of sex hormones. We might think of stress hormones in this situation, but we don't often think of hunger hormones, thyroid hormones, sleep hormones. They're all part of the same picture. And hormones have got this beautiful dance that they do. It's very much like looking at a dance troupe, generally. So if they're perfectly in sync, it looks beautiful. It's an amazing thing to watch. As soon as one person goes out of balance, the whole troupe gets confused, and you can really see it really obviously, can't you? If somebody goes out of step in a dance troupe, you're like really drawn to them. And you can't have one set of hormones that are going out of balance without the other hormones going out of balance. So as soon as you've got those elevated stress hormones, what happens is this adaptive response in the body. So the body goes, okay, we need to tell the adrenal glands to regulate blood pressure. So these people might be getting up from sitting down. They might be like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing stars actually. They might suddenly start to find that if they are maybe doing some yoga, they'll do some downward dogs and they feel really dizzy. And that is a sign of them having sort of some postural changes in their blood pressure. And that can be as a sign of their adrenal glands not picking things up quickly enough, actually starting to struggle on that front. We also know that the pituitary regulates our sex hormones. So we've got this signal that's then going to our ovaries and that's governing our sex hormones, that's going, yes, really bad time now to have a baby. Don't keep producing sex hormones. And this is when we see super, super stressed out women going through fertility treatments where it's like, you need to look at the stress first, because actually otherwise you're just putting yourself through an even more intensely stressful situation and you've got everything acting against you. It's not in your favor. So working on that stress piece, because, you know, ancestrally that would have been the right thing to do. If our tribe was being chased out of town by another tribe, it would not have been the right time to conceive a baby. We need to conserve our resources. So it makes perfect sense. We also see the thyroid downregulate. So this is where we see people who, you know, they've got like subclinical thyroid picture where they're struggling with, they're feeling cold all the time, they're tired all the time, they're putting on weight, particularly putting on weight around the middle. That's like an adrenal kind of thyroid picture. They might be blasting themselves at the gym, running miles and miles and miles as well to try and counteract this weight gain picture. And that's even worse. It's counterproductive. And they're dieting. And the thyroid's going, no, lower, 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 lower. And we've got this whole branch where in the thyroid, without going into too much detail of the kind of flow through, we've got T3 and reverse T3. T3 is our foot on the gas. Reverse T3 is foot on the brake. So reverse T3 comes out when we're chronically ill, when we're under immense amounts of stress. We don't often get a picture of what that looks like because it's quite expensive to test and it's not tested in the NHS. But with very stressed people, you can pretty much guarantee that they've got a ton of their thyroid hormone going down that pathway, which leaves not a lot for the foot on the gas. So we've got this adaptive picture of your body's trying to protect itself. It's trying to slow everything down. It can sense that everything's being tried to be sped up, but actually we want to slow everything down because it's dangerous for things to actually work at that speed for any length of time, because you run out of resources, you run out of nutrients, and actually you run yourself into a bit of an early grave. So that's why we get people who go through this adaptive response and then they crash, because they haven't listened to the whole, your body's sending you whispers, act on it or listen to it before it has to shout. And that's when the body is shouting, when we have this big crash. And so that's really kind of the overview of kind of what's going on within people who are super stressed. We're also, of course, adding on top of this because most people are very, very tired of relying on caffeine. And so we're further contributing to those adrenal spikes through the day. And if you've got caffeine on top of an underslept person because they've got too much caffeine or they're stressed, plus they've got some boss shouting at them, plus they get home and their relationship's not where they want it to be, plus, they've all got an awful commute or whatever it might be, that person's adrenal levels or adrenaline levels are just never actually coming back down again.
There's a lot of ticks here for me. Patricia, how about you?
Oh my God, when I was listening to you, I was like, yep, I better go see Jeni quick.
And to be honest with you, this was my picture. This was my picture when I was in corporate. And I also know, you know, without going into loads of detail about it, genetically, I have a SNP on one of my enzymes that processes adrenaline. So when I get stressed, and, you know, they reckon up to 30% of the population have this, when I get stressed, my adrenaline stays in my bloodstream for longer than is needed. It doesn't get cleared quickly. And so that sort of person will be not very resilient to stress at all, because actually they can't clear that adrenaline, you know, biochemically. So they feel that stress, they get stressed and then stay stressed for a long period of time.
Yeah. Jeni, we were talking earlier also about not only giving people the theory, but what you do is help them change their patterns and behavior, etc. So can you share a little bit more about that and also where people can find you?
Yeah, perfect. So from an individual's perspective, I would say the first thing, as with anything, with any change, is becoming aware of all these things, becoming aware of how they affect you. often we are just surviving the day, especially if we're in a traumatic corporate environment as well, you know, with the demands. There's no time to stop and think. There's no time to get that sense of how this is affecting me as a person, because there's almost, and you know, I speak from my own experience here, that culturally it was kind of a, yeah, well, we're all going through that, so just get on with it. But what they don't take into consideration is they didn't know my genetics. They didn't know that for me, being in a stressful meeting would mean that that whole day would be incredibly stressful. So it's about knowing yourself, not necessarily knowing your genetics, but knowing how situations affect you. So for certain situations, there is a long-term solution. So, you know, if the industry or the job is really unfulfilling and it's really not doing you any favors, and you can see that your health is starting to take a turn for the worse on that basis, then actually the answer is potentially that needs to change. And, you know, I speak to a lot of people through the wellbeing coaching side of things who that's their realization. That's not for me to tell them, but that's their realization through the process. What can we do as individuals? Well, you know, bucking the trends, making sure that we are having, you know, a decent, whatever the meal is that you break your fast with. So we are having a decent first meal of the day, that we're setting ourselves up with not a high sugar, high carbohydrate, you know, cereal bar, or even worse, cereal drinks I've seen people having, terrible, which are, you know, amazing for people's commutes, but, you know, a smoothie will do the same job, and it takes, you know, 30 seconds to create a good smoothie. Making sure that we're making time for meals, and we're making time for meals away from work. We're not doing emails, we're not, you know, taking calls, we're not being distracted during those meals.
People.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a lunch break, because actually you'll be more productive in the afternoon. It's this like fallacy, isn't it, that we're actually being more productive, but with a break you'll be more productive, especially away from the screen time. And if you can get out in somewhere green, even better, because there's so much evidence that just seeing green is very calming for the nervous system. It can actually cure depression in some people, and they've you know, done some great studies on that in terms of time in nature and how that affects people's mental health. You know, just having that time where you're putting yourself first in your working day, because we're so tight. I used to use the expression, I'm chained to my desk. And I very much felt that I was chained to my desk, chained to my laptop, chained to my mobile phone from Monday at 9 o'clock or 8:30, all the way through to Friday at 6, including all those evenings. And that at a drop of a hat, I could be asked to travel to here, there and everywhere. My job was very much on the road, and, you know, doing 30,000 miles a year. And a lot of people feel the same, you know, that they're at their beck and call of their line manager, boss, you know, company into the evenings, over the weekends, sometimes in holiday time. And it's really, really important to put those boundaries in place. And if you're starting a new job, putting them in place straight away. But if you're in an existing job, you know, it's not, what was the expression the other day? Where you're leaving your job quietly quitting.
Oh, quiet quitting, yeah.
I kind of disagree with it in a way, you know, because that's actually just setting your boundaries. It's setting, you know, you're only paid for that time. You're not paid for being on call all the time, unless you are paid for being on call. So putting in place your boundaries, because that's so self-fulfilling as well, and it does that whole dopamine pathway, that reward pathway of when you put something in place. You don't need to be, you know, overzealous about it or rude about it with your team or with your manager, but just setting your boundaries, and people will respect you for it. You know, people will have respect of that time. And, you know, when people are sending you emails at 10 o'clock at night, they don't need to be responded to at 10 o'clock at night. It's dropping down that level of, oh my goodness, the world is going to end if I don't action this thing. And, you know, after doing that a few times, it really sort of ingrains it then in your processes, in your consciousness, that actually it's okay to do that. The other thing is reducing reliance on caffeine. I'm a fine one to talk, but when I was in corporate, I was a time coffee a day kind of person, instant, not Costa coffees or anything like that, but still way too much. And so that was playing into my stress load on my adrenal glands. And as soon as I started dropping that out and just really relishing a particular coffee at a particular time of day, really good quality, you know, you can get a load of antioxidants from really good quality coffee. It's very protective of the liver, for example, and it can give you that cognitive boost. It can actually be, you know, an ergogenic aid if used strategically. And you can almost make it into a bit of a ritual. You know, that's your time away from the desk. That's your time away from work. You're spending time creating a lovely coffee that you're going to then enjoy, rather than just guzzling down the 8th cup of instant coffee. And then my biggest one, the one where I start with nearly everybody, is sleep. You know, because we have become a culture where it's almost like a badge of honor of like, oh yeah, I can get by on 4 hours sleep. You know, I know Margaret Thatcher used to go on about it all the time, and, you know, several of the really high-flying executives and everything talk about the fact that they don't need to sleep and that they're working all the hours. And that might be true for them, you know, they might be working on adrenaline at that point, but it is a real shortcut to very poor health very, very quickly. Our bodies need that balance of rest and recuperation. And we think about sleep as being a very passive process, but actually the body is going through so many processes overnight, from clearing the beta amyloid plaques from our brain all the way through to detoxifying every single organ in sequence. And if you interrupt those sequences, you don't get that opportunity again to detoxify that particular area. And the key time is 10 till 2. So that 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. window, which most people miss, you know, they miss a portion of it, or they might miss all of it if they're staying up really late to watch the next, you know, box set, or, you know, the next episode, which, you know, people do as a self-soothing mechanism, because they think, well, I've spent all this time at work, I want a bit of time for me. I want a bit of time, a bit of adult time, kids gone to bed, or a bit of non-work time to relax, and this is my method for relaxing. But actually investing in your sleep is the best investment that you can put into your body, because you'll be regenerating your body, you'll be clearing your brain, you'll be resetting, importantly, your stress hormones for the next day. And all of our hormones go into a reset after we've actually been asleep for a decent amount of time, you know, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's 7 hours, whether it's 9 hours, you know, go by feel on the body. You should be waking before your alarm, ideally. That tells you that you're actually optimally rested. But otherwise, we're going into the day half-cocked with stress hormones that are kind of up here, sort of all the way down here. And then you will be more snappy, you will be more quick to anger, you will be very, very easy to get a rise out of in situations which might not necessarily have bothered you otherwise. And, you know, that can be, you know, act now and repent at your leisure, because if that's in a client situation, you know, and you have this very quick response because you're underslept chronically, then, you know, that could be really detrimental if it's your own business, if you're in a very, you know, important client discussion. So sleep, I would say, first and foremost. And also, of course, I've got to say it as a nutritional therapist, getting those really balanced meals where you've got a decent amount of protein, limiting the quick refined carbs and sugars, and allowing yourself the time for those meals, just really carving out those times of day to be able to, like you say, put that energy back in.
You've inspired me. I'm going to change my habits.
Amazing.
That's so wonderful, Jeni. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I know that I learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of people watching will have learned a lot as well. If they want more information about you, where can we find you? Yeah, perfect. So my website is yumnutrition.org. I'm on Instagram as yum_nutrition_UK. And that's the social media platform I'm most active on. And then I'm on Facebook as well. And the handle is at Yum Nutrition and Wellness. And people are welcome to direct message me with any questions. I'm really happy to answer any questions. And I've got a couple of lives coming up shortly, actually, which I'll have as permanent IGTVs about particularly energy. So we've talked a lot about energy today, but I'll be doing a proper deep dive into it because it's the perfect question. Tuning into that. Definitely.
Thank you, Jeni.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.